What is going on, football fans? Back at it with another New York Giants video. Definitely going to have another video up for you guys later today. I'll touch on Micah Parsons and his pro day. Joe Judge was in attendance. I'll also talk about what I think the New York Giants' primary needs are going into the draft at this point in time, now that free agency is more or less done. But in this video, we're going to talk about a couple things for the Giants. The Adoree Jackson contract details came out, so now I could really get a better judge of what the salary cap looks to be next year and some of the things that the New York Giants may or may not do to free up cap space. Also touch on some of the pending free agents that the New York Giants will have to decide whether or not they're going to be able to extend them with a limited budget. And I think right now what you have to realize as Giants fans is don't expect fireworks next year. At that point, I think it would be a mistake by the Giants because you've already backloaded, which I agree with this year, with your quarterback on the rookie salary and their short-term commitments. Don't expect them to go out there and splash next year, because at that point, then you're setting yourself up for salary cap hell. But I'll touch on some of the things that the New York Giants will be presented with at the end of the season in terms of some of the decisions they may have to make. I'm also going to talk about the newly acquired offensive lineman, Zach Fulton. Now, don't get super excited, Giants fans. Do I expect him to start? Probably not. I think he's more of a depth guy. He could start, though, if they feel like Shane Lemieux was not ready and they don't address the offensive line early in the draft. I still think they will decide to take an interior offensive lineman within the first 3 rounds of this year's draft. But Fulton does provide a body at camp. He does provide depth, and he does provide versatility. He's been in the league for quite some time, a former 6th-round pick of the Kansas City Chiefs. Actually played fairly well there at points in time. And 2 years ago, the first 2 years with the Houston Texans, ironically enough, he was known as a much better pass protector than run blocker. This past year, however, he surrendered 11 sacks at the guard position, which led the league, according to PFF. So definitely regressed in that area last year. The Giants may view him as a guy that they feel like they could get a lot out of with their coaching staff and will bring versatility, a guy that could step in if players go down with injuries. He's played center. He's played both sides on the line at the guard spot. Like I said, a former 6th-round pick. We're going to jump further into him right now. First thing I wanted to pull up for you guys was the tweet from NFL Update. The Giants are signing former Chiefs and Texans starting offensive lineman Zach Fulton. That's right, he started each of the last 3 or 4 years pretty much as a full-time starter for the Houston Texans. Per Giants WFAN, has 90 starts since entering the league in 2014 and will add some veteran experience to the offensive line. And it's something that I talked about. Maybe this isn't necessarily the name a lot of Giants fans were hoping for. I think Giants fans were hoping for a starter with Trey Turner, but I think it's something they absolutely needed to address. You wanted to bring in a veteran, a guy that could provide depth on the interior part of this offensive line, being that we're pretty thin there to begin with. I still think we're pretty much going to be taking an offensive lineman at some point in this year's draft. Next up, I want to pull up the stats for you guys in terms of how many games he's started since he's entered the league. 2014, he actually started all 16 games for the Kansas City Chiefs. Then he started 12 games at left guard before being a right guard the previous 2 years. Then he moved to center in 2017, in which he started 12 games. Then signed on with Houston. He's played exclusively right guard each of the last 3 years, starting 13, 15, and 16 contests. So he started every contest for Houston except for one over the last 2 years. In terms of some of the things I wanted to pull up for you guys, this was actually off of the, whatever the equivalent is to Giants Wire for the Houston Texans. That's where I got this. I'm going to dive into some stats for you guys. One of the obvious cuts the Texans had available to them this offseason was releasing Zach Fulton, the former Kansas City guard and center who became a worse guard in Houston, like every other offensive lineman under Mike Devlin's watch, was a poor pass blocker, and his whateverness at the first level and problems reaching the second level added to the Texans' terrible run game. He and right tackle Titus Howard never really meshed well. Next up, I'm going to pull up this off PFF going into the 2020 season. Pro Football Focus released their run blocking and pass blocking grades for Fulton over his past 2 seasons in Houston. What the grades reveal is that the former Kansas City Chief is the right fit as a pass protector. That's what's ironic. His first 2 years, he actually did a really good job there, and we're going to dive further into it. However, he has struggled with run blocking. That makes the 28-year-old perfect to play bodyguard for Watson, but a liability as a road grader for running back David Johnson. These were the numbers for the offensive lineman, now approaching 30 for the New York Giants in 2018 and 19. Zach Fulton returns for his 3rd season in Houston on a restructured contract. His grades in his 2 years as a Texan: 2019, he had a 77 pass block grade, which actually ranked 14th out of 19 qualifiers. His run blocking left a lot to be desired. 42.5, 88 out of 90. In 2018, he had an even better grade at 79 69.5, which ranked 18 out of 86. 41, however, in the run blocking department, which ranked 83rd out of 86. This past year, like I said, really struggled in that department, something that Shane Lemieux really was bad at as well. Lemieux let up, I think it was 5 sacks in half a season's worth of starts. Fulton let up 11 at the guard position in a full season's worth of starts. Next up, we're going to pull up the contract for Adoree Jackson. I was kind of waiting for this to come out before I could fully evaluate next year's salary cap. A lot of you guys asked me to make a video on that, talking about next year's salary cap. Jackson, it initially came out that Jackson was going to be $16 million in the first year. That is true. However, they spaced it out accordingly based on the signing bonus. So he doesn't go that much against the cap this year, which is good news because we're able to fit more players on this year's team, and it's a condensed budget, and it only makes sense to backload salaries, but it's bad news because next year we're going to be really strapped, and we're going to jump further into that. If you look at the cap number here, his cap number this year, which is really the only number I care about, is $5.875 million, so nearly $6 million. You don't really got to look at the dead cap, but he takes up 3.2% of this year's cap. Next year, he will be $14.375 million against the cap with a $10.125 million hit, which means you're not cutting him. It will be definitely a full 2-year commitment to Adoree Jackson, which we all hope works out. Definitely has some upsides, got to stay healthy. But the Giants maybe take a little bit of a risk here, but I am happy that they addressed that second cornerback position. Then the following year, he will go $15.375 million against the cap, only holding a $6.75 million dead cap hit, which takes up 6.8% of the projected salary cap in 2023. If you were to cut him, it would actually save you $8.6 million. Hopefully that's not the case. If he's playing at a very high level, he will be worth more than that $15.3 million in the raised budget in 2023. They also tacked on a void year in 2024, which allowed them to fit him within this year's budget of a $3.375 million hit in 2024 when he will not be under contract with the New York Giants unless they extend him. But there is the salary. They did backload it like several of the other salaries, and we're going to jump into all the players on the future cap. This is how the New York Giants stack up in terms of future cap right now. This year, they have $6.47 million. That was before the Fulton signing, which I think will be league minimum. And then, of course, you still got to count for draft picks. Next year, based off a $203 million budget, as of now, if you look to the far right or left, depending on how you're viewing the screen, we only have $16.1 million. That does not include this year's rookies, and it does not include next year's rookies. And with only 38 players under contract in 2022, of course, the rookies will make up another 6, but they're going to have to fill in a lot of other holes between this year and next year's draft. Expect the New York Giants to be very conservative. I'm also going to talk about some of the free agents next year that they'll have to make decisions with. And again, next year, they will be able to re-sign some players. They'll be able to maneuver the cap much like they've done, but you don't want to do it too much. You don't want to kick the can too much because then you're worrying about retaining players such as Daniel Jones and Dexter Lawrence in the future, along with Andrew Thomas. Those guys are going to be getting paid big money if they perform at a high level. But just some of the names that the New York Giants will have to decide whether or not to bring back: B.J. Hill, Austin Johnson, right there. If you're not bringing back either, I have to think the New York Giants will address that position early in this year's draft. Also, you have obviously Jabril Peppers. Jabril Peppers will be a big-time decision, and my guess would be they're either going to cut Logan Ryan or they're going to let Jabril Peppers hit free agency after this year. I can't see them holding both on the roster, especially being that Logan Ryan would save you $7 million on next year's cap. That'll be a big decision they have to make. This number also does not include the 5th-year extension for Saquon Barkley. Another question that will need to be answered at the end of next year. Now, of course, they could structure the contract much like these contracts to fit under the budget, but I think the Giants will have to either extend Barkley at the end of this year or potentially look to trade him. That will be something that will be needs to be answered going into next year. But I'm going to enjoy this season before I start to think about things like that. Other players, Lorenzo Carter and Will Hernandez, will be free agents at the end of next year. And the Giants will have a lot of questions on their hand. In terms of next year's salary cap, like I said, as of now, and I only pulled up the bigger names, the guys that make more of a dent. But as of now, the New York Giants only have 38 players under contract in 2022. If you look all the way to the top, Leonard Williams across at the far right column in white, he's due to be $26.5 million against the cap next year. Now, it's possible the Giants could extend him and try to even out that money, maybe give him another year on his deal so he only hits 21 or 22 against the cap next year. Kenny Golladay, 21.15. That is his exact hit over the next 3 years of that contract, he would be a $10 million hit in the following season. They'd be able to get out of that if he was struggling. Hopefully that is not the case. James Bradbury, yes, you could save money, but do you really want to cut Bradbury? Probably not. He played at a near all-pro level next year. And again, he's another candidate that could be extended on a 3 or 4 year deal, and that may be what the New York Giants decide to do to, again, spread out that cap money to give themselves more money next year. Adoree Jackson will be 14.3 against the cap. Blake Martinez will be $14 million against the cap with a $5.5 million dead cap hit. Again, another candidate, in my opinion, to extend, and we'll have to wait and see. Logan Ryan is nearly $11 million against the cap with only a $3 million dead cap hit. So if he is not in your long-term plans after this year, it is possible the New York Giants could cut him. I hope that's not the case. I think he's a great leader on this team, but it's a business, and you got to find ways to bring players back. Same can be said for Shepard, who's due to make $10.5 with a $4 million dead cap hit. If they were to draft a wide receiver earlier this year, I do think that Sterling Shepard could be a cut candidate going into 2022 with that $6.5 million in savings. The Giants will need to evaluate their receivers at year's end. Of course, if they don't draft one, they still could draft one next year. But I think he is one of the more realistic potential cuts next year to try to save some money. You're obviously not cutting Andrew Thomas, Daniel Jones. Rudolph is possible, depending on how he plays. He would be a $5 million saving, 7.2 against the cap with a $2.2 million dead cap hit. You're not cutting Gano based on the dead cap hit. The next set of players that I wanted to pull up, obviously more lower-end players. Dexter Lawrence, you're not cutting. Nate Solder, you're not cutting. And by the way, before people flip out, he was due to be $18 million against the cap, if I'm not mistaken, with a $4 million dead hit. He's keeping that $4 million dead hit, but now is only $4 million against the cap. So it's the same to cut him as it would have been before this extension. He really did the Giants a service by restructuring that salary. They're now going to be able to keep him on the team next year for $4 million. Riley Dixon is a cut candidate at 3.375 with only a $125,000 hit. It would be over $3 million in savings. You're not cutting Gates, in my opinion. Booker's possible, depending on how he plays. He's $3 million against the cap or $1 million dead hit. Could save you $2 million. And the rest of the guys are kind of lower tier guys that I would not expect the New York Giants to cut. But if they did, maybe you save $1 million here, $1 million there. But those are the more prominent guys that are going to go against the budget for the New York Giants next year. And the Giants will have a lot of decisions on their hand. As far as Fulton goes, I think he's a solid signing, but I don't expect him to be starting this year. And if he is, well, the New York Giants could be in trouble. He's not the best of interior offensive linemen. I still think it's something the New York Giants will look to address in this year's draft. But as always, guys, if you liked what you watched, please subscribe, drop a comment, maybe give me a little thumbs up. Cheers.